Hello and good afternoon. Welcome to Axians live event discussing the future of network infrastructure. My name is Andy Butcher. I'm General Manager of the Public Sector Business Unit for Axians. I hope I know some of you that are joining this afternoon. And I'm joined by three commentators. Firstly, Chris Gilmour, who is CTO of Service Provider and Enterprise for Axians. Hello, Chris.
Hi, how you doing? Sorry, I didn't know his introduction. Yes, hello and welcome to everyone who's listening. And hopefully this is going to be an interesting conversation for many of you, covering some areas that are definitely of interest to many people at this moment.
Thank you, Chris. Joined also by Jonathan Hallatt from Pulse Secure.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jonathan Hallatt, so I'm the Regional Sales Director for the UK, Ireland and South Africa for Pulse Secure. Really pleased to be here. Thanks, Andy.
Thanks, Jonathan. And Graham Duthie from Pulse Secure.
And hello. As you say, my name's Graham. I'm a systems engineer team lead for Pulse Secure across Europe, Middle East and Africa, and very happy to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Thank you, Graham. So we want to try and make this as engaging as possible this afternoon. We're going to start with a bit of a conversation. We're going to talk about some of the things that are affecting network infrastructure today, both pre and post-COVID. And then later on, we're going to start to see how some of the new technologies can accommodate the changing world that we live in today. So, Chris, Jonathan, Graham, feel free to all jump in. But, we're all seasoned experts. We've all been working in network infrastructure for quite a number of years, more than we wish to remember, I guess. But personally, I've been involved in selling remote access solutions for decades now. And I've seen some evolution in those over that period of time. I certainly saw that the early days was a very simple kind of connection to the network, just to give you an IP address. And that's still what a lot of people use today. And then gradually, perhaps 2 decades ago, the concept of the SSL VPN was introduced. And that's where Pulse Secure's heritage comes from. So what is it that made that so successful at the time? Let's talk about how SSL VPNs emerged and why they were different, what they offered more than your traditional IP address.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, if I can kick off, because I've been looking after the Pulse remote access products for quite a long time now, right back from the beginning when we were a little independent company that first came up with the concept of the SSL VPN. And back at the time, if you remember, VPN clients were very clunky, very difficult to work with. And often you'd find that your VPN connection would be blocked. If you were in a hotel and tried to bring up a VPN, often it wouldn't connect, or you're in a coffee shop and there was Wi-Fi back then, it would be really difficult to get.
Yeah, I remember those days.
So that was actually why we started with the SSL VPN, because if you could get a web connection up and you could get an encrypted connection through with port 443, then you could bring up a VPN if you're using an SSL VPN. So that was the start, and loads of people wanted it to solve the problem back then of being able to connect to your internal Exchange server and run an Outlook to Exchange session over an encrypted web connection, and that's where the whole thing started off.
Yeah, I think it sort of bore out of the fact that most applications are still hosted on site. And when you weren't actually in the office, you needed some sort of secure connection to sync up and make sure you could download your emails, you could access the file servers in the back end, whatever mass ITSM or CRM systems that you're using at the time. They were all on-prem typically, and the VPN was a really convenient way for anybody to be able to sync their messages up and access the kind of services they needed to, albeit at varying levels of limitation because of bandwidth constraints. And there's always the challenge of you're on a LAN and there's 100 meg service in that LAN, and then you're on a kind of broadband at home and you've kind of got a smaller pipe. So it was always something that I would see as something that was a kind of extension of the kind of the interface and the LAN setup. So it was a way of extending the kind of services that you could bring from an IT perspective, so that people could have that home option.
And actually what we saw is things moved on from people just wanting a connection to saying, well, I want a connection for specific things. And then actually, even before I offer somebody a connection, I want to look and make sure, not just that I know who they are, but that I know what's running on the endpoint they're using to connect with as well. And I
because
think
back in those days, it was largely corporate or issued laptops, wasn't it? You know, people were taking them home, and so we still needed to make sure that those laptops that might be used for a little bit of homework were safe and secure when they connected, right? And so the SSL VPN offered all of these new concepts of host checking and making sure that, you know, things were patched up to date, right? So that was quite a good new thing to happen, yeah.
I remember people carrying around little router devices and plugging them into hotels because they needed to use that to set up the IPsec tunnel. You know.
I think some of the things that we went through would scare a lot of the latest generation of workers in terms of how clunky some of the solutions were that we used to carry around. But yes, I remember those.
But those solutions, you know, we're talking before smartphones, before tablet devices, and BYOD ever really emerged. You know, this was generally used on issued devices that were potentially being used for some leisure activities at home, and you wanted to make sure that they were safe and secure when they connected to the corporate environment, right?
So it was really just as the move from modems to wired internet connections came about, and people suddenly realized that they could use their home internet connection to be able to connect to the office rather than having to dial up directly to the office or dial up to an ISP. So it was a whole brave new world. But it's interesting how a lot of the concepts that started back then have carried through to today. And a lot of the things that people want to do are the same. The actual applications that they want to get to, you know, people still want to send email as well as do other stuff, but the way they do that has changed quite a lot over the years.
Yeah, and of course the number of applications in use has changed as well, hasn't it? You know, we've got a huge number now.
Yeah, I was going to say the fact that you're looking from an endpoint protection perspective very early on meant that when, as Andy mentioned, BYOD, bring your own device, started to kind of take more traction in the marketplace, there was a solution straight away that could allow you to check whether they're on the right version of the kind of firmware, and whether the end device, irrespective of whether it was a personal device or a corporate device, there was a consistent level of security. And I think that was a really key piece. It's one of the things where there's an ongoing arms race of whenever you build technology to help enable services, someone somewhere will be looking for other reasons to be using that same technology for more nefarious reasons. So the security and the endpoint capability from a very early stage has been one of the things that's been really strong for Pulse.
Yeah. And then, of course, we saw a lot of the next generation of firewall vendors starting to incorporate VPNs into their appliances. And, you know, a number of customers over the years I know have said, well, actually, you know, that's thrown into my firewall. I might start to use that instead. And I think perhaps this last year, maybe we'll discuss it a little later, but this last year is where we started to see the holes in those thrown in sort of VPN services on next generation firewalls. Jonathan, I know that you've certainly seen a lot of that. You know, customers coming and saying to you, look, that thing didn't perform the way I was hoping it was going to. And you know, now that we're at a critical stage, we're not just offering a sort of a nice to have type of remote access connection and something for our contract workers, for instance. Now it's an imperative. Now everybody's at home. You know, that VPN sometimes letting them down, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that we got to remember though is that this has been quite. You know, the last few months have been pretty different. If you look at the Office for National Statistics, they did some research around the number of people in the UK working population who are actually working from home permanently. And in November of 2019, it was around 4% of the working population in the UK, which is about 30 or so million. So about 4%. By May of this year, that was nearly 50% of the working population was permanently working from home. So that's, bear in mind that that's 16 million people, 15 to 16 million people. And so, all of the vendors in this space will have all experienced, challenges with customers saying, how do I scale up? How do I do this really quickly? How do I enable this? And in a heartbeat, how do I send everybody home and everybody connects? And I think what's happened is, as we'll talk about in a few moments, we've just seen this sort of explosion of different types of solutions that people are using, because they've almost filled up the capacity of one, and then they've found something else, and they've ended up with a kind of an infrastructure that's quite difficult to manage and put out policy and enforce policy.
And I think that complexity and a different user experience, depending on which application you're connecting to, which services you're connecting to, is something that, as we've seen some cracks forming there, certainly over this year. Yep. Because what we have seen since SSL VPNs came along, and then, as I say, these firewalls that were thrown into that had VPNs thrown in, what we've seen is, of course, the adoption of cloud. So people are starting to move applications to the cloud. They have to have perhaps a different security posture, a different method of accessing those services in the cloud. But what customers really want is they want all of their users to have a common experience. This is a challenge, right? You've talked about a complex mix of different ways to access things. And that's something that we're increasingly seeing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just add on that whole, I don't know whether you remember, going back a little bit to 2008-ish, there was the thing called the Jericho Forum, which was the organization with the two guys, one from ICI and one from Royal Mail, talking about borderless networks, perimeters. Now, that was the time when things were moving to the cloud. It's like, how on earth do you have a consistent policy between, the applications that are hosted in the data center and the cloud and so on? So way back then, then around about 2013, this phrase was coined, software-defined perimeter, by the Cloud Security Alliance, and so this conversation has been evolving as we've gone along, but it's just in the last few months has just come straight to the head, and that's why we're kind of talking like this right now. It's right in front of us, even though it's been discussed for a long time.
It's often funny that I think that these types of things that we're interested in and can get quite excited about, but then for most users, they don't care. It's like, I want my application to work. I don't care if it's in the cloud, if it's in a data center. I don't want to know. I just want to push the button and make it work. And the challenge, I guess, for us is to try to make that happen, but do that in a way that it's still you're secure and that the administrators have control. So you have a lot going on in the background, but you try to hide the complexity as much as possible for the user. And that can be quite a challenge.
Yeah, and I think you've hit on a kind of major trend there as well. Is when the VPN services first came out, it was about network traffic, it was connectivity, and the trend that's started to come through in the last couple of years, and it's one of the things that's been driving things like SD-WAN from a networking perspective, is the fact that people don't buy a network for the sake of having some wires in the ground. They have applications they need to be able to access, try and improve the customer experience, and basically it's about serving that application out as efficiently and as kind of optimally as possible. So you've got network-based services around SD-WAN, which is about an application-centric approach to network. And ZTNA is moving again from being a VPN connection, just in effect a pipe, to being more and more application aware. And it's about the trend is about handling the application the way it needs to be handled to make sure the optimal experience of the end user. And I think that's a really nice sort of dovetail on how kind of two sides are coming together. And the whole world is moving software based, and that separation of control and the actual data is driving a lot of convergence from what I can see in networking and security.
So you talk about network and security. We've not talked about security much yet. We have been focusing on remote access, but clearly security is another very important aspect to take into account here. We know that when you put your services that were on-prem out into the cloud, you've got to consider a different security posture. There was a time when NAC, again, another successful part of the Pulse Secure portfolio, network access control, was starting to really drive change. Okay, so you were able to take your laptop home, bring it in. You were able to provide BYOD services, and you could find a way of identifying not just users, but devices and even IoT devices as they connect to the network, and making sure that a suitable security posture is put in place, right? So NAC has an important part to play here, and that also extends out into the cloud services, right? You know, this is not just about on-prem services anymore.
Yeah, I mean, exactly as you say, it's the evolution of what people have wanted to do. So we started off talking about remote access and just people wanting connectivity from outside, and then thinking about that in an application level rather than just give me a network connection. Yeah. But what we saw as a remote access company initially, when we were just looking at VPNs, is that actually people wanted to take the security concept that had developed around VPNs and move that internally as well. So one of the things that we've done from the early days is looked at that endpoint security of what's running on the machine that you're using to connect in. Do you have antivirus? Is there a personal firewall? Are those virus definitions up to date? We can make sure that those things are in place before somebody gets a connection, brings up a VPN. But then, as you say, moving into the office, why wouldn't you want to do the same thing? I'm using the same machine. I could have been doing all sorts of stuff with it at home. My kids could be using it. Anybody could have done something with that. And then I come along to the office. Simply because I connect to the office network doesn't necessarily mean that that machine is secure. So you probably still want to run the same sorts of security checks. And that's where the NAC concept and our Policy Secure NAC product came from, saying, well, let's do the same checks on the endpoint. Is it still secure, comply with the policy, and then also still check that the user is who they say they are and that they're entitled to connect to this part of the network. And only once we're happy with that will we let them on. And we're going to come on to talk about zero trust, but that's the essence of it. It's something that we've been looking at for a long time, is saying whether somebody's remote or in the office, I don't mind, but I want to make sure that I trust them and their machine before I give them connectivity. And then now the same concepts are true today, but the things that people want to get to have evolved from all being in a data center in the office to sometimes being in a cloud, sometimes being in a data center, sometimes even split between the two. So adapting to those challenges and taking the philosophy that we've always had about those security checks and applying it to what people want to do today is really where we've been moving with the zero trust network access that we're going to be talking about.
And I think another thing to take into account, of course, is devices, right? So all the applications that we use on our devices are geared, they're designed for the customer, the user experience. And so it's okay to say we want to access a database or we want to access a service that's out in the cloud, but it's got to be accessed in such a way that we can consume it on whatever device we want. And so again, we're seeing some pressure here because it's not just an issued device anymore. We can't manage that endpoint. We can't always put an agent on that endpoint. You think about trying to secure students that want to use devices on in a university. You can't put an agent on their device, but you've got to make sure that they're given the right privileged access to applications wherever they might want to be. So we've got to think about how that can fit into it as well. And I know that that's a very important part of ZTA. Chris, tell us about the kind of our concept of next generation networking architecture and where we feel that or why we feel time is right to start considering something more than just an IP address on a VPN. The concepts that you've introduced to me about working from Rome, I like that terminology. What does that mean?
So working from Rome, it was, I think, a nod towards the fact that more and more people are mobile in their work life. And even before COVID was starting, we were seeing more and more people who were working from hotels, from airports, from cafes, from restaurants, from home, needing to
anywhere they can get a connection.
Anywhere you can get, that was it. It's basically anywhere you can either get a 4G signal you can twin your phone to, borrow, beg, or steal Wi-Fi from some cafe somewhere, or sitting in the business lounge at an airport. The ability to actually log on and actually be productive in those environments is becoming much more key. People haven't got the ability to just turn off for 2 days whilst they travel from A to B, because they would miss so many things that are coming through now. The pace of work seems to be accelerating, as everyone has been experiencing over the last couple of months with Teams and all the different kind of 50 different WebEx type or web application tools. So the work from Rome was really a nod towards the fact that you can't define a business environment as a head office and a branch anymore. There's still very valid parts of it, and they're still a big part of it, but they're by no means the end. And there's almost no boundary to where the workplace now sits. Someone can be as productive sat in a hotel in Iceland as someone who's lying on a beach in Brazil, as someone who's sat in the office in Woking. You know, there's two of them are going to be happier than the other one, but apart from that, the actual tool they can access, and with the fact that most applications now are moving more and more towards SaaS or IaaS-based platforms, it's basically internet connectivity. So the whole formation of the work from Rome is about harnessing technology such as the Pulse, ZTNA platforms, and indeed the VPN technology that was predecessor to that, to allow to allow people from an organisation to participate and to work from wherever they happen to be. It could be down to people looking after wind turbines in the north of Scotland who have an iPad, and they can in effect do their reports on the iPad and send that immediately off, rather than having to make notes, hard copy, go back, make more hard copy reports and send that by post. It's just about the immediacy and the fact that you can make much more on demand and to the minute decisions as a business, because your various parts of that business are connected.
And so we've got an illustration of how that fits into the enterprise architecture now, haven't we, as well, Chris? Perhaps we can talk through that. Yes,
if we can put the slide up now. Hopefully that's going to slide in. There we go. Okay. So what we've basically reflected here is the fact that not only is there is a head office generally, it could be the only office, it could be one of many, it could be one of a number of major offices. It's just to represent a campus environment and the different requirements in that. You've obviously then got external contractors who to come in. And this, by the way, is a prime use case for the NAC platform that Pulse developed. That ability to bring in third parties and give them a measured control to access resources. That's a really key thing now, because more and more businesses are working collaboratively with partners. More businesses are realizing they can't do everything themselves, and they have to work with other people to deliver kind of high-paced solutions that are being expected by their end clients. So working in partnerships is a much more key and critical kind of criteria now. So that is a really key part of this decision. And then you've got a variety of other different working locations. The key here is that we put a next generation WAN. That could be an underlay of 5G, it could be a carrier networks, but the whole point is we're looking at things like SD-WAN to give us an application-centric approach to that networking component. And then on the left-hand side, you can see my wheel of fortune in the corner there, and that just reflects just some of the things that you can, some of the locations you can be and still connect to the network. And we sat down and literally wrote down all the places we could think of where you could still work. And we had such an exhaustive list, we had to cut it back by about a half to get the icons on the same page here. But anywhere really you can get satellite connectivity or 4G or 3G or even 2G if it's limited, you can work from. You can twin your phones. Most smartphones now you can twin to a laptop or an iPad or any other kind of tablet or phone. You have that ability to twin that service, which means that realistically you can work from wherever you can actually stop. For me personally, it tends to be if there's a plug nearby, that helps immensely, because all this power usage, I tend to get all my batteries start to die quite quick. But realistically, I can work as efficiently from home as I can from a customer's environment. And again, that's a really key one, is working from your customer's premise. But you're still working from a secured environment. You're still you can either use their Wi-Fi and use their NAC to get into their solution, or you can use your own connectivity and then use the kind of the VPN or the ZTNA solution to give you secured access to your own resources. All of these are about accessing the resources and the applications that you need, which means that there's a cloud component. Most of this is about building the best solution or the best connectivity to your applications wherever they sit, to give that customer experience to the end user. And what we're seeing is that it's no longer tied to being on a physical cable into a desktop in an office block. I can have as good an experience working from my phone, sitting in a cafe having a nice coffee.
So one of the things you mentioned there, Chris, that makes some sense, is that if you're working from somebody else's site, Graham, you mentioned earlier the challenge of the traditional VPN punching a hole through the firewall so that your VPN can get out and can get access to your corporate environment. Those days are gone now, aren't they? We don't have those challenges anymore, do we?
I don't think we have those challenges, but actually I thought it was interesting looking at your diagram here. I think it highlights one of the things that certainly we're seeing that people are facing as a challenge, that all of the offices and branches that are hanging off the Next Generation WAN platform there are things that absolutely we can help people access from wherever they are. We can bring up a VPN connection or an application level connection to allow them access to things that are within the corporate network somewhere, accessible across that Next Generation WAN. However, people also want to access other things at the same time. So you've got the cloud up there at the top. And of course, one obvious option is to say, well, if I'm on the corporate network or on that Next Generation WAN, then I can simply connect out from there to the cloud. But actually, often it can make a lot of sense to say, let's connect directly to the cloud, because it's the the lowest latency, quickest way of doing it from wherever I am. I simply want to get to OWS or I want to get to Salesforce. Let me go there directly. But actually, at the same time, I still want to have my VPN secure connection up to the office. And as we'll see, that's one of the things that we've really tried to design around our Zero Trust Network Access solution, is to allow the administrators the flexibility to set this up in the way that makes most sense. You might want some people to go direct to the cloud because that's faster, easier. Maybe you want to route some traffic through the corporate network. Perhaps you want to make it dependent on certain variables, depends which machine you're using. We're really all about giving you options about what makes the most sense at the time. But I think the issue that lots of customers are facing is that these applications are all over the place, and they need to figure out a way of making the user experience really easy. You mentioned a little while ago all these great cloud apps that are around, and people have to sign into them. So when you've got one or two, that's easy. When you start having 10, 20 of them, to have to log into each one individually, gosh, that's a bit painful. So how do we make that stuff easy for people? And how do we just make the connectivity work seamlessly behind the scenes, but still make it secure for people? And those are some of the challenges we're trying to help address.
And I think that hybrid approach is where definitely people are going. And it's about, there's different approaches to how you make the connection, but the customer experience and the experience for the end user should be as consistent as possible and secured. And that's why solutions such as the ZTNA is a really nice dovetail into the other kind of parts that we put together here for this reference model, and is entirely valid, and they all contribute towards the overall. So yeah, I think that the applications being hosted wherever is it's an explosion. It used to be that everything was in your data center, then everything went to one, so everyone moved all their applications to AWS or Azure. And then quite quickly found out that was a painful and miserable experience, and are now starting to either distribute their applications into the best workload locations for them, or increasingly they're starting to target more SaaS-based services. So rather than host your own application, then just basically take it as a service. And if you can take that same application as a service, or a competitor to, or whatever, that makes your life a lot easier. But from a perspective of the network, we shouldn't have to say, well, that's over there, and that's over there, and that's over there. I've got to build a different policy. It should be a case of, I open up the application, it finds where the application is hosted, and my experience is optimized. And that's where
you don't want to sign on to every.
No, exactly. And that's where the application centricity of both the ZTNA and the other kind of application pieces really come to the fore.
So we talked a little bit there about working from Rome, and never has been more obvious than this year that we've suffered with the pandemic, where everybody's had to, very quickly mobilize their workforces to work from home, work from Rome, work from the kitchen table, wherever they possibly could get a connection. So we've seen the impact of that. And I was just reading the latest report from just this month, actually, from global data, where they're saying that only a quarter of workers want to return to work premises on a full-time basis, and almost half of the respondents of their survey want a flexible return to offices. That's an enormous number. And you know, Jonathan, you were saying that the tiny percent, was it 4% previously worked from home? You know, this is enormous now, and we know that there's a lot of people are going to be taking some time to go back to work because we don't know yet when we're going to get a fix to this. So we've seen the stress and the strain that's been put on VPN solutions. We've seen people cobbling things together and making it work. We've seen a lot of use of RDP and understanding the security vulnerabilities in some of these key applications. People have tied things together and kind of made it work. And you know, we've been very fortunate. We've been lucky enough to help some of our customers mobilize their workforce. Actually, one within 48 hours of their request, we managed to get their equipment up and running so that they could have some researchers carry on working. So you know, we've seen a massive impact from COVID. We can't ignore that, of course. But how has that changed the way people look at remote access and ZTA? What reflections have you seen from the field, Jonathan, on that?
Thanks, Andy. So, well, let me before I sort of answer that, why don't we share some research that we've commissioned, and we about a year ago we commissioned this research, and we actually published it at the end of January 2020. So if you think back, that was before, you know, prior to everything kicking off. And I just thought I've got a couple of slides that I'd like to share just to sort of give a summary, some of the key points there which might help guide the discussion. So if I could have the first slide up. So this report was we were in partnership with Cyber Security Insiders. We commissioned them to go and find out, because fundamentally Pulse Secure has been involved in the zero trust world, as Graham said, for many years. We've had that same kind of engineering philosophy, and but what we wanted to try and find out is that everybody started talking about zero trust towards the, you know, in 2019. But what we wanted to find out is is this just another hype word? Is this just something that everybody's talking about? And secondly, are they actually, if it's not a hype thing, are they actually going to spend any money on it? And is it actually going to change any behavior? So we commissioned this. We had just over 400 people respond, and they were from the US, from the United Kingdom and Germany. And it was across all kinds of different verticals, and they were tended to be from companies with more than 1,000 employees. So it's a decent enough sample. So if I could just have the second slide, please. I guess the first thing that we asked them really was around the current secure access challenges and what they sort of ranked as the most important things for them to deal with. And I think we were quite surprised by this one. The first one here is this idea of overprivileged employee access, this idea of, you know, the employee that's been with the company for maybe 15 years, through no fault of their own, have ended up with access to all kinds of applications and networks and everything else, and as a result become what we call a large attack surface. You know, in a sense, if somebody gets control of their device or their devices, because they've got all this access to all these different things, through, you know, which they perhaps no longer need because of the job they're doing now doesn't require them, they present quite a threat. So that's an interesting one. And I think the other one for us was this shadow IT one down in the right hand side. You know, a big problem with you know, departments within organizations exasperated with the slowness of IT and security audit, and all the people that tell them no all the time have gone off and found solutions themselves and installed them without any kind of permission being sought. Because in a lot of companies, security is all about control and not access, and it should be the other way around. We believe it should be all about access and not so much control. It should be that should be the main thing. So those are two areas, and I think if we can move to the next slide.
Jonathan, the overprivileged access, you know, this is a problem that we've seen forever. This is, you know, when people inherit privileges, for instance, because they're part of a certain group within Active Directory. As you said, when people change from one role to another, they get granted access to applications, and rarely do people go in and clean this up. And, you know, you might have one employee that's been there for 15 years and they got the same level of access. And it's simple for an IT department to bring in a newcomer and say, right, they're going to be doing the same role as those people, inherit the same permissions. And it's quite scary that that's not not commonly audited, and that happens very often, that we have overprivileged access, right?
Yeah.
And,
yeah, I think that's right, Andy. And you, I don't know. I think you and I were talking to one customer who also said it's actually not so much the existing employees who've moved around. It's actually employees who've left the organisation, and we aren't 100% sure that we've cut them off from access to various applications, because some may be run by different departments and so on and so forth. So it's a big business challenge, I think, and that's something that I think Zero Trust aims to try and address. So on this one, this slide, we asked them around what tenets of the Zero Trust idea do you find the most compelling? So what are the things that, when you think about Zero Trust, and one of the things that we hear quite a lot is people saying, well, your idea of Zero Trust isn't the same as mine, and there's quite a lot of different, there's quite a lot of discussion goes on about this whole concept. And so we asked them, what are the key things? What are the tenets that you like? And again, the one that came out top was a little bit of a surprise, really. But the main thing is that continuous, as Graham was talking about, that continuous authentication and authorization. Once somebody's connected and has gone through all of the various levels, if something changes on their device, does something happen automatically? Do they get pushed to a remediation area? Do they get cut off altogether, or something else? And that's a real key one. And then over on the right-hand side, we asked them about what are the drivers in the organization which are moving you to try and find an identity access or Zero Trust management solution. And again, they probably won't be too surprising, those listed there, but those were the things that the report found.
And I think one of the things that's interesting is when you look down that list, there are often things that we have been doing for a very long time on our VPNs, and we are just applying the same principle to a slightly different type of access or a slightly different type of connectivity. So on the continuous authentication and authorization, that's something that we've been doing with the host checker that was mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
So we're not just looking at the beginning to see is somebody got the right username and password and member of the right group and running antivirus. We're constantly doing it. So as Jonathan said, if you suddenly plug in, I don't know, a different network card into your computer and something changes on your system, we'll see that happen. And if it's against the policy, we can stop you connecting to the network. We can remediate you, tell you that it's not the right thing to do. Or your antivirus suddenly pops up with something, a warning, or your virus definitions expire. We can see that and we can take some action on it. So those are things that we've been doing in the remote access VPN world for a long time. But we can apply those to cloud access. We can apply them to internal networks. And it's interesting sometimes to see the industry get very excited about a new thing that they've come up with, and Zero Trust and Zero Trust network access becomes this new shiny thing. But when you actually think about it, often they're things that we've been doing for a long time that are just wrapped up slightly differently. So it's one of the things that has made it quite easy for us at Pulse to be able to say, well, actually, we are a Zero Trust company, and you know what? We've been doing this for a long time, and we can do the things that customers are actually telling us that are the top of mind when it comes to Zero Trust access.
So thanks, Graham. So the next slide is just a question. Was a question around what are the organisation's current security priorities, and it's just interesting how these then tie into the whole Zero Trust thing. So on the left, and the kind of overwhelming one was all around identity access management, identity and access management, and that's a key thing. And that's a whole other area of technology which you've seen many vendors playing in that space. But over on the right hand side there is what we were talking about earlier, which is this. I really want to move. I have a hybrid environment. In fact, virtually every customer that we speak to has a hybrid environment, really, by and large. I mean, despite people's protestations that yes, we've got a cloud-first strategy, the reality is there are plenty of older applications and so on still running in that sort of thing. So there is a hybrid thing. But how do customers move that around, move applications around into the cloud, back into the data center or whatever, without the user knowing, and without the user having to remember where that is to when they connect, and not to, that you want to make that that decision completely seamless from the end user. The end user just carries on working regardless of where that resides. So, zero trust access should be really around, sort of unified policy and a great user experience. Those are key kind of tenets for us. So if you move to the next one, if you can. There is another, so that report that I just talked about there is much longer. There's a lot of other information. It's on our website. You can download it for free. It's quite a useful document. This is another document which again is available on our website, but also available from Gartner, and it's their market guide to what they call ZTNA. So they're terming this segment of the market zero trust network access. But I think, Chris, as you said, it's not zero trust network access. It's actually application access. This is the whole thing. Forget what's on the network. The user doesn't care where the network is or where it's going or anything. It doesn't care which route to take. The user just wants to do their job, which means get that application and do what they need to do, and then stop. And so they talk about in the Gartner guide, which is really good. Actually, there's some really useful business outcome definitions in there, but they talk about the attack surface, and if you just say these are the applications you need to do your job, therefore the attack surface is much smaller. But the other thing they point out on here, which is a little difficult to read, but in the overview, in the key findings, it talks about VPN replacement as a common driver for companies looking at zero trust network access. But they do make a point down here saying that whilst that may be a driver, VPNs are rarely the ZTNA is rarely a replacement for VPN. So I think it's really it's just a word of caution, really, just to say that this is not necessarily a like-for-like replacement, as Graham said right at the start. These things are to a certain extent running in parallel as applications go on, particularly when you have many legacy applications and so on.
Yeah, I definitely see them as complementary. The VPN is accessing your corporate estate, and if your applications are still hosted in your corporate estate, then that's how you need to access them. If you're looking at an AWS hosted SaaS platform, then the ZTNA makes more sense. But they're not conflicting options. They are complementary, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. So can we move to the next slide? So the next slide here is just for us to what we tried to do is consolidate. If you could just build it out there, that's great. Thanks. And what we tried to do here is just sort of encapsulate what we've seen since February this year to now, and what we've seen with our customers and what's going on in the market and so on. And it's just interesting that, as we've talked about earlier, this concept, this notion of VPN access at the top has been around for many years, and as we've said, has been deployed for 20 to 30% of the workforce. Those ONS statistics, it's 4% permanently work from home, but they did say another 20% had the ability to work from home, but were moving around at different offices and so on. So we've moved from this kind of nice to have to being this critical infrastructure for workers. And I think we probably all agree that yes, people would like to go back to the office, but it's certainly not going to be the way it was for the short to medium term, at least. And so this whole change has really changed that. So the and what was interesting is that we then see customers talking about decline use of the VPN, which you think actually is sort of counter to what they should be doing. But fundamentally, they're looking at, okay, we've patched all this stuff together. What do we do next? Or how do we build an infrastructure which is better suited to what's in front of us than to what we were used to do? And how do we look at what our employees need to do, where they need to do it, when they need to do it, on what device they need to do it, and actually build the infrastructure around that, around the user, rather than what's gone before. So down the bottom there, we have the zero trust sort of thing. Before February, we were talking a lot about zero trust because it was the buzzword. But what's interesting is that certainly during the initial response, everyone sort of slid back to VPNs because that's what they knew. They just got it all going. And now I would say virtually every conversation we have with our customers is, that's great, but we need to really think to the future, and how do we do that, and how do we build that together, and how do we go on a journey from where we are today to this application access. Okay, so I'll just say, to go to the next slide then. This is my final one, and then we'll hand over to Graham on that one. But this is just, if you could just press the button again, build the slide up again. Yeah, that's it. So this is just a very simple side-by-side comparison that we built just to highlight the differences between the kind of the standard firewalls that are being used on Firewall VPN and then the zero trust access, and just to give some key bullet points on that. So so I'll stop talking now, and if there's any questions now, and I'll hand over to Graham maybe to take you through that, then onto the demo.
So let me just say a few words around the VPN and the zero trust things, because in some ways there's quite a lot of overlap between them, as you know, as Jonathan says, and we can see on the slide there. But actually, there's a sort of fundamental different philosophy that we've just been talking about between both of them. So VPN has certainly always been about that network level connectivity, and just give me a connection and make it secure, and pretty much any of my applications are going to go down there. And historically, it's not been too worried about what's the endpoint, is the endpoint secure, does it comply with the policy? While at Pulse, that's something that our VPNs have always done. In terms of looking at the industry, it's not been a big deal. So in some ways, the move to zero trust is the industry catching up with what we've been concerned about for a long time in the security side. And it's part of the name of the company, is Pulse Secure, has been because we have cared about the things that are now coming to the fore with zero trust. So looking at that endpoint security, doing that continuous monitoring of making sure that the security policy is being complied with, as well as checking to make sure that the user is who they say they are, maybe integrating with dual factor authentication, possibly looking at the group that they're a member of within an Active Directory or similar, and then deciding what level of connectivity to give. So when people talk about zero trust, actually a lot of it can apply to what we've been doing as VPNs for a long time. But actually what we are trying to do, and what I'll show you in a second with our Zero Trust Network Access product, is take that a level further and actually solve some of the issues which are coming more to the fore today, and what we've been talking about with the hybrid IT of a lot of organizations having to deal with lots of different applications in lots of different places, be it in the cloud, on-premise, or across multiple branches, really in lots of different locations. So where the industry is talking with zero trust is something that we think we've been doing for a while, and where we are going, we think, is a step further ahead from that again. So you know, we see a lot of overlap in our world between VPN and zero trust, which perhaps if you just look around the industry is not quite so common.
I'd say one last thing on that. Sorry, I was going to say one last thing on that comparison there also is that when you're looking at next generation firewall VPN, the one thing that strikes me straight away is the ability to scale. And whilst as Andy mentioned earlier, many of the firewall vendors have built in a capability to have a number of VPN tunnels connect to them, it has a definite impact on, well, the performance of the actual appliance, but also the scale that it can actually go to is generally fairly limited. Whereas true VPN solutions, the scale is an order of magnitude higher in terms of the capable connection. So I think that it's one of the things that has really come out of COVID is that people who had gone for I only need 2 or 3 people to log in every now and then, so I'll go for a firewall solution. When everyone's now logging in, if you've got a call center and there's 500 people trying to log in through a firewall, you are going to have an impact to service. So it's about maintaining that customer experience whilst scaling to kind of cope for the threats around the corner you're not aware of.
Absolutely. And I think that the slide that's on the screen just now is the Pulse Secure mission statement. And actually, I think this has been our mission statement for quite some years now, but it applies just as much today and just as much with what we're doing with Zero Trust Network Access as ever before. And actually, when we're talking about secure access solutions, as we've been doing for the past hour, it's expanded beyond just that initial give my computer a network connection to my corporate network, and I'll go from there, to apply to something much more broadly. So we've been talking about it being people related, so is the right person connecting to the right thing, being device related, in the is this device secure? Those people and devices are trying to connect to services, and those services can be in loads of different places. But actually the other thing that we're seeing quite a lot of is term to your things, is that sometimes there's not actually a person sitting behind the thing that's trying to launch a connection. So you want to secure that as well. So all of the things that we've talked about sort of come into focus with what we're talking about here. But the ZTNA, Zero Trust Network Access, and the Pulse Zero Trust Access solution that I'm going to show you really is our attempt to try to make delivering these secure access solutions a real thing, and deal with this issue of there being services in lots of different places, lots of different people trying to connect to them, and lots of different devices being used. So I thought it was an interesting thing to take what we are trying to deal with as a company and look at what our mission statement is and see how that translates into actual reality. So I think
one of the good things perhaps to frame the change from traditional VPN, firewall-based VPN, as we said, they've got limitations that it's only going to serve people that are connected to it, and so therefore your connection has to go through that firewall or that VPN appliance. So we've changed that a little bit now because we can offer VPN as a service, so people have got far more scalability, so they can manage ramp up and down in terms of employees connecting. So that's all good. But what that doesn't really deal with is where your applications are, where your users are, the kind of devices, the things that you mentioned there, making sure that we can secure anything that needs access to any application wherever that application exists. And this is where we're starting to see the real change from traditional VPN to ZTA. Is that fair, Graham? Is that a good summary?
Yeah. Absolutely, I think it really is, and it'll be interesting to see how the whole thing develops. But I think together we are quite nicely positioned to be able to allow people multiple options and to gear them up to be able to deal with however the industry develops and whatever happens with applications. Because as we said earlier on, it's only a few years ago that everybody was moving all their servers lock, stock and barrel to the cloud, and Amazon Web Services, Azure, etc. I've seen some of that come back the other way.
Yeah, they're coming back.
Actually, with us, we can deal with that. We can allow connectivity to wherever the application is, and we can make it transparent for a user. They don't need to know that it's moved from a cloud to on-premise or the other way about. We can make it transparent for the user and allow those secure connections wherever they happen to be.
Yeah, it's an IT problem, not a user problem.
Exactly. So I think we've got one more slide here, which is a diagram that I'm going to use to hopefully show you some of this in real life and let you see some of the things that we've been talking about translated into an actual real life environment, hopefully. So it's a little bit of a busy slide, and I know it's quite small. So let me just see if I can talk you through what I was trying to show here, in that all of the things that we've been talking about so far have generally been possible in a sort of traditional VPN environment. We can set up connectivity, and as I've been saying, Pulse has been able to do this zero trust stuff for a while, looking at the endpoint and making sure that we trust both the user and the machine. But actually, one of the challenges that we've seen a lot of organizations facing is that those applications are no longer just in one place. As we've said, sometimes in the cloud, sometimes a data center, sometimes a branch office, lots of different places. So the old way of dealing with that would be, say, well, let's just give you access through a single gateway, and then behind that gateway will allow you to connect to all the different things you might need to get to. So I'll secure the traffic from your client endpoint, and I'll secure that over a VPN tunnel to a gateway, and then from the gateway we can connect up to the cloud or to the data center or to a branch office or wherever we need to go. And while that works, actually it doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense in terms of having bottlenecks of traffic or being able to go to the fastest, quickest path to get where I want to go. So actually it often makes sense to have multiple gateways. So maybe I want VPN access to my SD-WAN in the cloud. Maybe I want a gateway to my data center. Perhaps I want a gateway direct to a branch office or to my office in New York or whatever it happens to be. So we've seen multiple gateways appear. But when you do that, then suddenly it all becomes quite difficult to manage. So I'm setting up policies in each gateway, and that becomes a bit tricky. And then what happens when I introduce a new gateway? What tells all my client machines that, hey, there's a new thing that you can connect to get to some other application somewhere? So as part of this move towards zero trust access, we thought, let's create something that allows us to have multiple gateways, all managed from a single place. And then, as I think Jonathan touched on much earlier on, let's follow this new architecture of SDP, software-defined perimeter, because whenever we talk software-defined, usually we split the data traffic from the control traffic, which makes a lot of sense in what we're trying to do here, in that I want my data traffic to go to the right gateway, but maybe I want all this control to happen elsewhere. So the thing that we've been building as Pulse Zero Trust is having a controller, which is that little cloud symbol in Azure with a dotted line around it at the top there, and say, let's hold all our policies in the controller. Let's that be the place where you can define multiple different gateways and say which applications are behind these gateways, and also set the policy of who's allowed to connect to those applications and what needs to be in place. So the little grey box at the left-hand side is my client, so somebody wanting to connect to things. On the right-hand side, those circles with the data center, with AWS and Azure, can be where my applications are behind there. And what we want to do is allow the user to bring up their application and have basically multiple different connections available to different places, depending on the security status of their machine, who they are, what they're allowed to get to. So where we're moving as Pulse is saying, well, let's allow you to keep your existing VPN infrastructure in place. We have lots of people using it. It's been very successful for a long time. We're not taking that away. You maybe still want your traditional VPN in place to connect a network level connection to your data center, but actually let's allow you to have lots of different application level connections to other places, to other gateways. And that's what the Pulse Zero Trust Access, PZTA, is allowing us to do. You can add on to your existing VPN capability and say, let's have more gateways in place, have those in front of lots of different applications, and let's have a single point of control where I can put all the policies and that will route those traffic down the appropriate VPN or the appropriate gateway. And all the great stuff that we've talked about and the things that are appearing on the right-hand side there in the text about what makes a zero trust environment are all things that we comply with and we're doing with zero trust network access. So hopefully that makes a bit of sense in terms of what we are trying to do. If we stop the slides there, and then what I'm going to try to do is share my screen with you so that I can show you a quick demo of what's going on. So when I do this, I lose visibility of you guys. So just shout if I'm pushing the wrong buttons or not doing the right thing here. But fingers crossed, you're able to see my Windows desktop at the moment. And what I want to show is initially what this stuff looks like from a client perspective. Now, I know this is going to be quite small on the screen, but it's just to give you an idea of the concept. As a user, I want to be able to get to my applications regardless of where they are. And the nice thing is that if you're an existing Pulse customer, you're probably used to seeing the Pulse VPN client, which if I just open it up here, looks a little bit like this, typically sits in the background of a device, and the user doesn't necessarily need to know that it's there. So we've got capabilities with our existing VPN that you can simply open up your laptop, and if the Pulse client is there, it will automatically connect for you. If you're outside of the corporate environment, it will bring up a VPN and you don't need to know that it's doing it. So the Pulse Zero Trust Network Access and a Pulse ZTA or ZTA solution is really just building on that, saying, well as having a traditional VPN available, let's also allow you to have multiple network connections or actually application connections to different things at the same time. And you as a user don't need to know that it's happening. So that little client can sit in the background. It's getting its instructions as to where you're allowed to connect to from the controller that I was talking about. But there doesn't necessarily have to be any user interaction. Now, me as a user, I just want to connect to my application. So let's use web applications as an example. And if I wanted to, I could just bring up my browser and type in the web URL that I need to get to, and the Pulse stuff will take care of it behind the scenes. But what I can also do is, if I've got the Pulse client up, if I just push that ZTA button there, it's going to open a web portal for me that's going to show me what my administrator has actually set up to allow me access to. So which applications are available and which things that can I get to. So in our little demo system here, we've just got a couple of things that will hopefully allow me to show you the concept. In that, let's use Salesforce as an example, a common cloud-based application that people want to get to. And actually, with Salesforce, do I really need a VPN connection? You know, Salesforce is in the cloud. Do I actually just want to allow my traffic to go direct to Salesforce? Well, maybe I do, but I still want Pulse to do the authorization and authentication for it. I don't want to have to be typing in usernames and passwords. And I still want Pulse to be doing that constant endpoint security checking. So while I'm connected to Salesforce and could be uploading, you know, dodgy documents with viruses in them, I still want my antivirus software to be running. So in the Zero Trust Access world, I can just push the button here for Salesforce. I could, of course, just bring up the browser and type in the Salesforce URL directly if I wanted to. But you see, I get this button saying log in using ZTA, which I've just brought up just to show that I am going through the login process. I haven't had to type in a username and password or dual factor authentication or do any of those things, because actually at the back end of this, Pulse is handling the user authorization and authentication, and provided the Pulse client is authenticated, we're doing back-end single sign-on to this application. And in my case here, my browser is now going direct to Salesforce without me needing to hairpin through the corporate environment or bring up a VPN. As an administrator, I have the option of forcing that if I want to, but in a lot of instances, maybe I want that traffic to go direct to Salesforce. But if I was to go somewhere else, so if I have another application, let's say it's this thing that we've labeled here as Acme Gizmo Portal. Imagine I work with the Acme Gizmo Corporation and I want to get to my internal portal. All of this stuff and getting here is actually going down my VPN to the corporate infrastructure to be able to bring up my Acme Gizmo page. So I've got my Salesforce traffic that's going direct to Salesforce. I've got my traffic to Acme Gizmo there going over the VPN, and I haven't had to deal with it. I haven't had to know what's going on behind the scenes. My Pulse client here has taken care of it. It's sent the traffic in the right direction. And actually, it's also doing that continuous checking to make sure that my machine complies with the policy. You can see here, it says meets security policies. This is exactly the same that our VPN has doing for a long time. Those security policies could be like, make sure my antivirus is up to date, make sure my personal firewall is in place. So you see how from an end user perspective, I don't really have to know all this is going on behind the scenes. And I've been using some web applications as an example here. These could just as easily be client server applications that are running directly on my machine. These days, most things tend to be web-based, but often you run into legacy applications which are directly installed and directly running on the machines. We can deal with those as well. Now, very quickly, let me just show you a little bit of the administrator side of this as well, because I think you'll like how easy it is to set this stuff up. I was talking about the controller that we have, and the controller actually runs as a service in the cloud. So the Pulse Zero Trust Access controller is running itself in the cloud. So when you decide you want to use the Pulse Zero Trust Access solution, you have a controller instance set aside for you in the cloud, and then you log into that instance, as I'm just about to do here. And from that cloud controller instance, you can define your gateways and your applications and your users and your policies. And then you join those things together to say which users are allowed to access which applications that live behind which gateways. Now, so that we can see a little bit of data of what's going on, I've got a live dashboard view here, but my gateways are in America and most of the Americans are still asleep at the moment. So what I want to do is change the time period that I'm looking at here. So we have some data that's lasting a little bit longer, and I can see a little bit more of what's going on. My initial screens here just give me a little bit of an overview of the system that's in place, the number of gateways that we have in use and the number of users that have used the system, and an idea of where those are. And then as I scroll down a little bit, I can also see of the people and devices that have connected in, how many of these are compliant or not compliant. I can see the issues that have caused non-compliance. So in my instance here, people who have been connecting without the semantic antivirus in place on their endpoint. So I can get a really good feel of what's going on. And also, as I can drill into individual gateways, I can see the status of these gateways, how many active users that they have, how many applications are behind those gateways. So that's all really useful stuff. But one of the things that I think is also really useful is the ability to see and to visualize which of my users are actually connecting to which applications and how are they getting there. And you can really see using your views such as this one here, where I get a feel for which of the applications that I'm seeing connections go to are the ones that are most used, which gateway people are going through to get there, and which devices that people are using to make those connections. So visualization of the traffic that's actually going through these gateways and the amount of traffic and the compliance of the policies that have been set up is something that's really key to us. So we're not just providing the connectivity and security, we're providing the visibility to allow you to see what's going on as well. Now, actually, what I really wanted to do is show you the simplicity of setting this up. So I mentioned really that we split things up into 4 main sections. Is looking at the users, so I can define who my users are, how to authenticate those users. We're looking at devices and device security, so I can go in here and I can set up policies, so those policies like looking at the endpoint and looking for antivirus, etc. And then I can define applications, so maybe let's have a look at some of these. So these are the applications that people want to get to, and you saw in my view of the world, I was looking at the Acme Gizmo portal and I was defining Salesforce and Salesforce with a SAML single sign-on to take me there. Defining these things can be as simple as saying, well, here's a URL. That URL, in this case up at the top here, my Acme Gizmo portal, is sitting behind one of my gateways. So I define that URL, I say which gateway it's sitting behind, and then the Pulse client will take care of seeing any traffic trying to go to that application, that particular URL, and it will route it over the appropriate secure connection to the appropriate gateway. So all you're telling the controller is which application is sitting behind which gateway, how to recognize that application, and then it routes the traffic over the appropriate connection to allow things to get there. Now, I can talk about this for a long time, as you've possibly realized, but hopefully that gives you a feel for what it is that we're trying to do with Pulse. And you can see how this isn't a like-for-like replacement of an existing VPN for a new way of doing it. It's something that lives side by side. So often you'll have your existing VPN, just give me a network level connection into my office, that can absolutely stay there. But maybe I also want a set of application access connections, secure connections that go to different gateways and have different applications sitting beside them. That's what we add on when we add the Pulse Zero Trust Network Access solution. But the beauty of the whole thing is it's the same client that's managing those connections. If you already have our VPN, it's exactly the same client that's doing that. The upgrade to the client works the same way as client upgrades have worked for a long time. It's just an extra upgrade to implement the zero trust network access. And actually, as now you know, when we've been talking about zero trust, although this zero trust network access applies to this new application, multiple levels of connections, the zero trust also applies to your VPN, because we've been doing the host checking and looking at the endpoint for a long time. So sorry for talking for such a long time, but hopefully that gives you a feel for what we're doing. And
I think one of the key things there was the mention about the single sign-on, because I mean this is. It was mentioned earlier, the fact that the privileges and the fact that you have excessive privileges and a lot of people, or people who've left the business and their access control is still in place. This would give you a single pane of glass, in effect, to manage all of those applications wherever they sit, and the control and access to those. And one of the things that I've seen from the Pulse platform so far is there's a really, really granular approach to how you can devise individual use cases and allow certain users very, very specific levels of access control, down to literally one file in a folder, and it's incredibly kind of granular. So this is a very, very sophisticated way of allowing you to manage that single sign-on from a diverse application stack.
And absolutely, and it's interesting actually when you look at some of the other things in the sort of wider networking world that we've been talking about around things like SD-WAN and other solutions. They all have their place in solving a particular set of problems and work together really nicely. And it's one of the things that that Axians is able to do, bring these things together, where often you can use the zero trust network access solution for connecting to some things, and that makes a lot of sense when you've got an individual machine that you want to be able to have multiple connections to different places. But when you have a network or a branch or something that you want to just make available across the network, then some of the other technologies are better placed. And often I get the question about, well, is this better than that one, or should I use an SD-WAN or a VPN or a zero trust access? Often it can be all of them. Or you can sit down and you can figure out, well, what are you actually trying to do? Well, this is the solution that makes more sense for you.
Certainly.
Yeah, I think that's an important point, and that's why it plays a great part in that next generation network diagram that we had earlier on. This is a component part. We know that people are moving towards application visibility so that they can get better management of application access, right? That's what's changed as we've moved applications to the cloud, and as we've changed the number of devices that we all use today, we've got to make sure that we're providing the best user experience for connecting user to an application. It's as simple as that, isn't it? So, using a combination of those techniques in that next generation architecture, I think really starts to make sense.
Yeah, I think also the kind of with the softwareization, which is my own word, of many component elements, I'm patented. One of the key things that's come out of it is that centralized orchestrator. SD-WAN has a concept of a centralized orchestrator. A lot of the born in the cloud security platforms are central orchestrator. We have a central orchestrator from your own tool there, and I can only see that convergence increasing, whereby you'll be able to API between them, and then this is building towards the kind of Gartner's golden child of secure access service edge. And that model whereby it's no longer a network or security or connectivity. It's basically a converged sort of platform, and that doesn't have to necessarily be one vendor providing everything. That can easily be bringing the best in breed in a variety of different areas to provide that end-to-end SASE model. And I think this dovetails beautifully into that.
And then one thing I just wanted to add in is we haven't really talked very much about the network access control side and where that fits in the cloud picture. And we have been seeing quite a lot of people recently that have been moving to virtual firewall and network infrastructure installations in the cloud. So things that people would traditionally have had as a physical box that sits in their network somewhere becomes a virtual box and it's sitting in the cloud. And with things like firewalls, you still have policies that you need to manage and you're letting people through or not. And traditionally, that's been where network access control can interface with those firewall policies. So back in the old world, when everybody was in an office, when you connect to the office network, perhaps your network access control, as well as letting you onto a particular VLAN and to connect to the network, might interface with a firewall and say, we'll open up this set of firewall policies for you. In the new cloud-based world and the move to this hybrid IT, the same thing can apply, and you're still using the network access control technology just in a slightly different way. So as you connect into that cloud-based environment, you might still want to talk to a firewall, but this time it's a virtual firewall, and you're still sending it policies to say, well, let's open up particular paths and particular policies to certain users. But it happens to be that those are maybe connections between the cloud and the corporate network, and you say, am I allowing people to go over there? So the ability that we have as Pulse, where we're looking at network access control as well as remote access and zero trust access, is all of that can sit within the same client and within the same sets of policies. So you can say, we'll allow access to the cloud, I'll bring up that VPN connection, but then I'll also send some instructions to the firewall to say, well, let this person further into the network, or let them do further things. So I think one of the things that we look at is this whole area is not multiple different little silos of technology. Whenever there's a person, a device, or a thing that's trying to connect to something, we can enforce the policy of whether that's allowed or not and provide the connectivity. And all the things we talked about today are just little different pieces of the puzzle, but within the same overall view of secure access and allowing people to get to the things that they need to get to.
And I think it's something that Jonathan talked about earlier on. It's about privileged access now, isn't it? You know, rather than a user having to make a decision, or rather a user having to do multiple sign-ons to different applications. You know, you grant the privilege to make sure that the user gets access to the right applications. That's the change that we're seeing here. Gentlemen, I'm gonna move on to some questions that we've been receiving. So, how can existing Pulse Secure customers take advantage of this when they've already got either VPN or NAC from Pulse Secure?
Mm-hmm. Do you want me to take that, Jonathan? Or okay, that's good. So the great thing, as we've been saying, is that the client for all of these things is the same. So whenever you want to even try something out or move to it, there's no need to do a completely disruptive change to user environments or do anything that's going to kill what you already have in place. So really all that you need to do if you want to try out or to see if the zero trust network access solution is going to solve an issue that you've got is to come and talk to us. We'll give you an instance of the cloud controller that you saw, and we will allow you to set up as many or as few gateways as you want to that are controlled by that cloud controller. And the fact that it's cloud-based means that it's really easy to implement very quickly, because you're not having to install physical boxes anywhere or do anything along those lines. And the gateways that you install can all be virtual as well. So whereas in the past, maybe you had an SSL VPN box, which is a physical box with some flashing lights on it, you can still do that in the zero trust network access world, but most people these days are going for a virtual instance. So it's a case of turning on access to a controller instance for you, allowing you to download the gateway software that you can then install wherever you want it in front of those applications. And then you can configure, and you saw how easy it is, the controller to say, here's my applications, this is the gateway that they live behind, and here are the sets of users that I want to be able to access those, and that's it. If your users already have the Pulse client in place, all you do is tell the controller to let those users have access over those multiple new connections. So
it's really easy for people to try this out then and see how it could work in their environment. You give access to a few applications for a few people to try it and see how well it works.
That's it. Yep.
Yeah, and I think the key thing is that it's not, again, it's an IT problem, not a user problem. So the IT team will have a little bit of work to do in the background. From a user perspective, it's the exact same client they've been using. They work the same way as they've always worked. They connect the same way they've always connected. It will just in the background, it will work in a slightly different fashion.
Yep, That's
Great.
I wish I could say it that briefly. Did you notice it takes me 5 minutes to say what you just said in 30 seconds?
Okay, got another question come in. Can you geofence regional access and time control application access for certain times of day? That's bound to be one for you, Graham, because I'm certainly not going to try and answer that.
I think the short answer is yes. So some specific bits of that might be things that we're still developing, but the geolocation part is absolutely something that's in place. So we can tell where you are when you're trying to connect to an application. And actually, in the first instance, we've been using that for anomaly detection. So one of the things that people are quite worried about these days are people trying to access things that they shouldn't, obviously. And one of the ways of being able to see that something odd is going on is if I all of a sudden, as well as trying to access my application from here in the UK, pop up and it looks like I'm also in China at the same time trying to access something. And you think, well, that's a bit weird. It can't be in two places at once. So we're geolocating people to see things like that and spotting the anomalies and being able to flag those up and stop those. But at the same time, we can use that geolocation to allow or deny access to certain applications, or to send you to certain gateways that make more sense based on your location. So we're kind of building that out as we go along just now. The Zero Trust Network Access is still pretty new, but absolutely the component parts of that are in place to allow us the flexibility to do all these things that have just been asked about.
So I got a question, and I think this is probably for you, Chris. So SASE is something that people have started talking about now, and I think that really is in its infancy, where you're buying into a portfolio of things that allow you to add things like software-defined WAN and security and remote access and all those things together. Perhaps we're a little way away from that, and perhaps it's a fairly small market. Do you see that ZTNA is perhaps bridging the gap? Where people don't want to go down the full SD-WAN route, and they don't want all of the component parts of SASE, but ZTNA can lay in quite nicely into their current infrastructure.
Most definitely. I mean, I think that, many would argue SASE is here already. It's always the early adopters. But realistically, SASE is if you break it down, it's an intelligent endpoint that handles an application and dovetails with cloud-based security gateway, DDoS, all the URL filtering, all of those things. Now, from a branch perspective, that would typically be SD-WAN and a cloud-based security platform. For a home user, and the ZTNA is doing the exact same thing. It's application-based, it's application-centric. You're creating secured tunneled endpoints, and you're making decisions on your routing based on the application and what it requires. So I most definitely see ZTNA as being an important part of the overall SASE model. And as I mentioned before, I don't think SASE is one thing. I think it's a collection of capabilities that give an overall consistent application centricity around how you handle the network packets, but also then how you secure them and how you access them. And I think if you can build that model out for enterprise, then you have to model that out with where those enterprise users are sitting. As we mentioned very early on, 4% in December last year, 50% in sort of March this year. I'd imagine it's probably slightly higher than that right now. So people, I can't ignore that. Yes, SD-WAN is going to be a big part for the of that application centricity component of SASE from a corporate backbone and branch and office perspective. But we can't ignore the fact that so many users are dynamically and moving around the country. Even without COVID, the number of people who are working remotely has increased ridiculously, because more and more people need access to applications, and that could be from wherever they are. So yes, I'm the short version, after being told I did a nice short version last time and then extending this time. The short version is yes, I 100% believe that ZTNA has an integral part in building a SASE model for enterprises.
Great, thanks, Chris. So any other questions from the audience, please just keep on posting them. We won't get time to get around to them today, but post them on the Axians live event page, and we will get back to you in time. Before we close, just want to get some closing remarks from everybody. If you'd like to just, give us a quick view. We've been through a bit of a journey today, talking about the past and the future for network infrastructure. Certainly about remote access and secure remote access. We're seeing an increase. NCSE are reporting daily about the increase in cybercrime, the increase in phishing attacks. So we know that security is high on people's agenda. So closing remarks from around the group, please, Jonathan.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. I guess I would also, all the security measures you put in place and everything else, it really does come down to the user as well. And so, I think if you're, this technology is fantastic and everything else, but I think user education is really, really important. For IT teams to make sure that they're continually updating users on what not to do and what not to press and clicking things and everything else. And I just think that's such an important thing that sometimes we love selling technology to people and everything else, but actually there's some really important work to be done there as well. I think because ultimately it is human error that is behind many of these things. So so that's it. But thanks very much for inviting us on this.
Thanks, Jonathan. Thank you, Chris.
I would agree. I think that the more we can do to almost remove any kind of thought around how the security actually works, and they just have to do, you connect, you access the applications you want to access, you work with them as you would normally, and all of those other considerations have been taken into the background and are just being delivered seamlessly as part of the solution. There's no sort of requirement to log into screen after screen after screen. Things like the host checker make sure that if you've accidentally forgotten your antivirus updates, it will prompt you. So it's about helping the end user to be as security savvy as they can be. But it goes to show there is no one single silver bullet. It's about a number of different converged solutions that are coming together that are making users' experience better, but also more secure.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Chris. And Graham.
And I think I would just say that when looking at this stuff, often it can seem overwhelming, and there's an alphabet soup of ZTA, SASE, all sorts of other stuff. And as an industry, we're great at coming up with a shiny new thing that's got a new set of letters to talk about. But actually, the principles of what we're doing here really haven't changed for a long time. It's all about making sure that the people who are trying to get to applications can get to it, but just so long as they're the correct authorized people and that the device that they're using to connect is secure and complies with the policy. And once that's okay, then we'll figure out a way of being able to give them a connection. So the principles are the same as things that we've been doing for years. It's just a slightly different way of looking at them and something that's slightly extended. So it's like, don't get overwhelmed by the all the jargon that flies about. Actually, most of this stuff isn't in principle that complicated.
And I guess for myself, what I've learned from this today is that you're right. It's no different to what we've been doing in the past, but perhaps the architecture has changed ever so slightly as applications and services have moved to the cloud, as users have become far more remote, roam users. Having a gateway that's in the cloud where you can secure your applications without having to manage something on-prem, without your traffic having to come back on-prem, gives you that level of scalability and that ability for the single user experience. That's what I'm seeing from this. And thank you very much for contributions around the table today. I think we're just about running out of time, but it's been an absolute pleasure. Jonathan, Graham, thank you very much for supporting Axians, and hopefully we'll continue with far more business with you for many years. Thank you, Chris, for your comments from a CTO's perspective.
No worries.
We're going to close now, but I hope viewers have enjoyed today's edition from Axians Live. We will have more of these. Please stay connected to the group. We'll let you know when more events are coming up, the next topics we're going to be talking about. And if you've got any things that you'd like to make suggestions for future topics, please just post them in the live group, and we'd love to accommodate that for you in the future. Thank you all very much.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.